Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Israel Tour update as we're set to deliberate the latest here in the region and beyond, particularly now with the almost conclusion of the 80th summit of the UN General Assembly. We will discuss all of that at length, but before that, as ever, we remind all of our viewers that today we mark day 721 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates committed their terror acts against the citizens of southern Israel. That is on October 7th of 2023. And with that, I'd like to introduce our experts for today, to include TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve, Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, as well as an Israel Air Force Commander, among others. It's great to see you, General. And last but not least, our regular general here, Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish, who is the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. It's great to see all three of you. And Mr. Oren, right now, as we record, obviously, there are various discussions taking place at the UN General Assembly. Nonetheless, while diplomats talk, guns don't always stop, or rather stop blazing, since there's plenty of hostilities across the globe, including in our very own region, with the IDF pushing further, deeper into the Gaza city, with both divisions 98, 36, as well as Division 162, operating in full force against Islamist Hamas in that terror-infested territory. Give us a little bit of an update as to what is the current state of play.
So, as you know, the first month in the Jewish calendar, Tishrei, has its first 10 days between the Jewish New Year and Yom Kippur, and this time is usually set aside for stock taking and soul searching. And apparently this is also the time where, without a pause in fighting, diplomats and leaders are trying to hatch a plan to stop the war, release the hostages, and bring about some improved condition for the citizens of Israel, as well as for the population of Gaza, but not for Hamas, obviously. So as we are speaking, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is addressing the UN General Assembly, President Trump is putting the finishing touches on his 21-point plan for the Middle East. It may be unveiled on Monday when he meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu, having met already with Arab representatives, as well as with Turkish President Erdogan. And we may be at the final stages, at least of this particular period in the war, but it remains to be seen whether this is practical, how long it will take. And as you said, for the time being, the Israeli ground maneuver is methodically progressing inside Gaza. There has been the first incident of a suicide bomber, a Hamas terrorist who was approaching the forces and was killed from the air, obviously by a UAV or a drone, because there is an overwatch for the troops, and the chief of the general staff, General Zamir, prioritized troop or force protection over any other aspect of the operation. We will later obviously deal with other sectors, but let me just remind our viewers that the IDF is still operating against Hezbollah's efforts to reestablish the positions in South Lebanon, and that we have a blow against blow exchange with the Houthis in Yemen.
Indeed. Well, I will point out that lessons learned from this multi-front war, particularly in the Gaza Strip, is something that not only Israel needs to do, but at a time when tensions are rapidly rising between Russia and European nations, NATO at large, to include, of course, also the United States. We are seeing that the North Atlantic Alliance is working vigorously to study lessons, to study the various occurrences in the war in Ukraine, opening a specific institute specifically in Poland. For that case, I do expect NATO to do the same also vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip and to work closely with Israel to prepare itself for the days and months ahead. At the same time, we do hear also earlier today at 9 a.m. Eastern, particularly Eastern Time in New York. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, coming out and stating on the plenum of the UN General Assembly, Israel wants to end the war in Gaza and hopes to do so as quickly as possible. What are we to take out of that, General Rosin? 9 a.m., just for the sake of our European viewers, excuse me, is 3 p.m. East, or rather Central, and the time here in Jerusalem and in Finland would be at 4 p.m. earlier today. Go ahead.
So I think that, when you talk about how to wage war in the military academies, there's this saying that this acronym called DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic areas which you operate in order to win a war. Because war is not only about military, it's about all forms of power of a nation. And I think that Israel right now is, from a military perspective, the M in the dime, it did a lot in the last 2 years. But translating that to a victory and maintaining control of the narrative is the real challenge. Is the real challenge Israel has to deal with today, because diplomatically, from an informational point of view, and all this is affecting economies around the world, and Israel's economy with its ties around the world, it's really a huge setback in all fronts, in all the three fronts. So I think right now what we're seeing is, again, Prime Minister Bibi trying to maintain control of the narrative, but I think he's on the defense right now, and really, really heavy offensive from all fronts. His friends, Israel's friends, are leaving it. The Saudis in the region have basically declared they're going back to the 2002 peace initiative. That puts them on hold basically until something happens, including the two-state solution. And Israel's closest friends, the European in Europe, are basically showing their back. And we're seeing all this now in the General Assembly. And yet to be seen what Bibi is going to, take out of the hat right now. But we've lost control of the narrative. Basically, that's what I'm seeing from my perspective.
So I do agree with you, but partially, since I would like to give somewhat of a more optimistic outlook. Friends are made known when you face your toughest moments. And right now, you can see that Germany remains steadfast in its position vis-a-vis Israel, despite specific, issues related to the delivery of certain weapons to the IDF for the war in Gaza. But nonetheless, in the general fora and its approach from a policy perspective, it remains steadfast. Same goes for Italy. Same goes for the Netherlands. The foreign minister of the Netherlands, who ended up actually quitting his job and resigning, Meneer Kasper, did so after failing to pass sanctions against Israel, which indicates that the Netherlands was not willing to do anything in that line, and more so, the parliament then moved ahead in contrast to that attempt by passing a resolution at the Dutch Parliament supporting Israel's war in Gaza and the eradication of Hamas. So we do need to put things in perspective here. Israel is not alone. It has strong friends in Europe. It is in a very tough position. I do agree with that. But nonetheless, it does have to face reality where still it has true friends in Europe, in the United States naturally, and elsewhere. But at the same time, General Gavish, I'd like to ask you to expand on the challenge that Israel continues to face from an operational standpoint, since Prime Minister Netanyahu also spoke during his speech at the UN General Assembly. He mentioned that last year he was standing there and was speaking about Iran, the threats from Iran, and a year later, he stands at the podium, today that is, which also marks, by the way, the elimination of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, during the course of which we do have a very interesting reality in which, I mean, the Middle East has seen a tectonic shift with Hezbollah on its knees, the Iranians batterly hammered, the Assad regime fallen with a new interim regime in place. Let's see how long that lasts. But nonetheless, the whole region is completely changed. And no, the war is not over. But nonetheless, a lot of strides were made against Israel's adversaries.
Well, you're right, Jonathan. You know, we are here in Israel and in the Jewish world between Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, and this is always a good time to look back and to see what did we do in the last year and how could we be better for the next year. So I think that from a military perspective, for sure, this is something that you know, if we remember the last time that our prime minister was there in the UN, we were in a completely different situation, and now Israel is in a much better strategic position via Hezbollah, via Syria, via Iran, and also also we could say in the Gaza Strip. And Jonathan, once again, from a pure military point of view, we still have some challenges ahead of us. We've talked about the Iranian challenge, and we also are looking toward the Houthis. Unfortunately, we saw the UAV that hit in Israel, in the south part of Israel, in Eilat, and the Houthis are still trying to challenge the Israeli defense, although we could say from one hand that 98% of all the projectiles coming from the Houthis were intercepted by the Israeli Air Force and the air defense, but still some of them are penetrating because it is not hermetic, as we always said. And this is something that we have to deal, and we would have to deal for the next year. So the challenge is there from Iran and from the Houthis, and this is one of our main goals for the next year. Of course, leaving aside the Gaza Strip that Amir talked about at the beginning of this update.
Thank you, General Gavish. Mr. Owen, one thing we should never forget, and that is that there are currently 48 hostages in Hamas captivity. Up to 20 of them, of course, are believed to be alive. Nobody really knows. Hamas has just recently relayed a message to Israel that if it continues to push into Gaza, it will put those hostages in harm's way. What can be done in order to intensify the pressure on this terrorist organization that is murderous in essence?
You know, Netanyahu mentioned, obviously, he's taking a page out of Trump's book. He mentioned early in his speech that the war in Gaza should end, that it has gone on for too long, and that it should end. But again, there are conditions. And one of his conditions is obviously for Hamas to be disarmed, for the Gaza Strip to be demilitarized. And there is no dispute between any of the parties regarding the necessity of ending the war. Again, we are approximately at the same spot we were regarding the terms. And this is where President Trump can step in and fill the void between the parties. Because up to now, the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, were only relaying messages. They could not contribute anything of their own. President Trump, if he has the stature that Hamas obviously gives him, saying that if he commits, for instance, to a 60-day ceasefire in return for 10 of the living hostages, one half of the 20, then Hamas will meet Israel's other conditions. So maybe we are on the brink of that. Maybe this is part of what Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner and Tony Blair have been reported to draw. But there is also, we shouldn't forget, there is also the Iranian angle with the snapback provision. And there is one important difference between the present and 10 years ago, because now Russia and China are siding with Iran. They are not part of the international front against Iran.
Yes, but when it comes to the snapback mechanism, there is no vote in the United Nations Security Council that can block it unless there is unanimous voting amongst all 5 permanent members of the Security Council, something that it cannot attain. So Russia and China being there means nothing when it comes to their objection. But nonetheless, I'd like to move to you, General Well, then, I'd like to ask you specifically, when we're talking about, and again, we'll touch on something small, brief answer, if you will, and then something a bit longer. First, Israel, as the former IDF chief of cyber staff, Israel has taken over all of the phones of Gaza and is currently broadcasting the speech live, or currently during the speech of Netanyahu, broadcasting it live to viewers in the Gaza Strip. So basically taking over all of the phones and doing so alongside loudspeakers that were put up throughout Gaza with the hope of having the hostages hear it wherever they may be wherever Hamas may be hiding them. What are we to take of that?
Good question. I think that maybe, if you look at it from an informational campaign point of view, it is good to talk to the people of Gaza. Do the people of Gaza do they have control over what's going on in Gaza? The answer is no. Hamas has control over what's going in Gaza, and they have control of the hostages, 48 of them, which are still in Gaza. It's a good gimmick, and they will hear what he has to say, but they have nothing, almost nothing, no influence on their leaders, on the Hamas leaders, which are not in Gaza. Mostly.
Well, I also ask myself, General, how many of them actually speak English, but that's already a different story. Let's move to the other question that I wanted to ask, and if you can keep it relatively shortly. But for the last couple of years, you've been very adamant on highlighting time and again the necessity to translate the tactical achievements in this war to a strategic achievement or victory, one of which you highlighted time and again was the assertion of sovereignty over the borderlands with Jordan, namely the Jordan Valley. President Trump has overnight announced that he rejects any Israeli annexation of the so-called West Bank, to include the Jordan Valley in that context. What are we to make out of it?
I think very simply, I think that is a failure on Israel's part to understand the wider implications of how to end this war, because it's all about balancing how you balance and how you build a narrative of winning, of victory. And I think that there's a difference between Judea and Samaria and not the West Bank, because the West Bank is not Judea and Samaria anymore, because Jordan let go of its West Bank. So Judea and Samaria, I can understand President Trump's words, and I have listened very well to it. That's the only thing he said. But regarding annexation of the Jordan Valley, that I think is a different question. And I think that is where Israel needs to maneuver to gain an annexation decision and recognition of its eastern flank and have a permanent eastern border and not have it 10 kilometers or in the widest option from Kfar Saba or Tel Aviv, if you will. Israel cannot stay a small and such a small country with its narrow shoulders. So I think that is where there is still room for maneuver, and I hope this will be part of the discussions in the next few days.
Indeed. Well, the situation is too fluid, to say the least, to understand the true outcome of any type of conflict, and the situation will persist irrespective of when the war ends. I don't see the situation calming down anytime soon in light of Iranian aspirations, and not only Iranian aspirations, but what's happening now in Syria and elsewhere in the southern parts of the Horn of Africa are going to have vast-reaching implications. General Gavish, I'd like to hear your take on, you already mentioned the drone that the Houthis launched at the city of Eilat. The IDF, or rather Israeli Air Force, responded quite strongly against targets of this Iranian proxy in Yemen. But nonetheless, when we look at the long-term trajectory of those events, does Israel have an answer? I mean, there are reports about certain interesting developments in Yemen, but those type of projects, which we won't speak broadly about now, but nonetheless more of a proxy war taking effect there, is something that will take time to develop.
Well, you're right, Jonathan, and allow me to refer to the question that you've asked before, General Rosen, about the cyber warfare and all this, I would say, new dimension of warfare. What we are seeing during this war, and this is something that we are seeing also when we are fighting against the Houthis, the Iranians, and the other, is that Israel, from a pure military point of view, is basically using all the dimensions of the war fight, and it is using it sometimes for the first time in the world history. We've talked about it more than one, about those interceptions that we saw up in space, first time for Israeli system, US system. So this is, of course, one dimension. And other dimensions, as we said, that this is, I think, something that, once again, I go back to what I've said before, between Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. If we look back, we probably would be studying from a military point of view this war here in Israel for a very long time, because what we've seen here, it is really unprecedented in the history of warfare. So, and now going directly to your question, as we mentioned, the Houthis are still there. I think that there is, an effect that with the time we would see it, because Israel is again and again striking the Houthis. We saw it, by the way, with the United States, because at the beginning the Houthis continued, but there in some point we understood that it did this effect. And I suppose that if we would continue with it, of course, at some point this also would make the effect on the Houthis. At this point, we don't see it yet, but I believe that for the long term, this is something that we would see. And we still have to remember that We have one flank fully open in the Gaza Strip. So it is also a matter of decision of how many efforts Israel wants to put toward this threat. At the end of the day, 98% of the projectiles are intercepted or are being rejected or denied from the Houthis, and this is super important.
Which includes also the unmanned aerial vehicles.
Yes.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Doron Gavish, General Yaron Rosen, and Mr. Amir Oren. We had a discussion about the drones in yesterday's edition. That is why I asked you this, General Gavish. But nonetheless, to our viewers at home, I'd just like to highlight that we are about to end this month, but we do need to emphasize that TV7 Israel is a donation-based organization, a ministry. Therefore, if you're blessed by our productions and would like to help support our ongoing operations, you can do so by providing a donation via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. With that, I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and yet again, a Shana Tova from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.
Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.